From Yoel Romero confusing people by urging the Miami fans to wake up, to Volkman making a bad joke about the President of the United States needing a glassectomy. In the history of the UFC, there have been a lot of cringe-worthy post-fight interviews. So why don't we narrow down some of the most infamous ones? Starting off with Yoel Romero. You all must remember when Yoel Romero absolutely crushed Lyoto Machida in his first UFC main event. Even if you don't, you must remember the embarrassing post-fight interview that he did afterward. That win was his 5th in a row and made him a serious threat to the middleweight title. But then he did a post-fight interview that left everyone confused and offended. Instead of talking about his win over Machida, Romero went on a strange rant in broken English. He told fans in Miami to wake up and asked what happened to you, USA. He even made a reference to Jesus Christ, but then shouted, "Not for gay Jesus, people."
What happened to you, USA? What happened to you?
Como es que Dios se ha manifestado en mi vida, ¿no? Como Dios ha tenido misericordia de mí.
I live day to day seeing how God has manifested himself in my life, how he has mercy of me.
No he sido el mejor hombre del mundo.
I haven't been the best man in the world.
Un accidente duro,
I suffered a very difficult accident
donde se me dijo que no podía seguir más mi carrera deportiva.
where he was told that he would never continue his sporting career.
Either way, the rant had nothing to do with MMA or the fight with Machida. Fans and fighters were left scratching their heads and feeling awkward. It was a cringe-worthy moment that did more harm than good for Romero's star power. And if you thought this was awkward, boy, wait until you hear what Jacob Volkman had to say about Barack Obama. In the world of UFC, it seems that politics and MMA don't always go hand in hand. But that hasn't stopped some fighters from pushing their political agendas before or after their fights. Jacob Volkman is one of those fighters who tried to get political in his post-fight interview after beating Efrain Escudero. This guy had already made a name for himself by calling out then US President Barack Obama after winning against Antonio McKee. And naturally, it got him a lot of attention, even getting him featured on The Tonight Show. But after beating Escudero, Volkman took things a step further. He cracked a weird joke about Obama needing a glassectomy. After the dumbfounded silence, he explained that it meant putting a piece of glass in his stomach so when you have your head up your butt, you can see where you're going. Yeah, it was pretty cringeworthy. The fans in attendance didn't get the joke either, and it was met with mostly confused silence. Even Joe Rogan couldn't hide his discomfort. And it wasn't just the fans who weren't impressed. Volkman ended up getting put on administrative leave from his job as a high school wrestling coach at White Bear School in Minnesota. It's safe to say that Volkman's attempt to mix politics with MMA didn't go down well with anyone. But that wasn't the only time that politics was brought into the ring. Ben Rothwell has certainly had his say on the matter. Let me tell you about his wild ride in the UFC. Back in the day, he was a big dude with a killer punch, but didn't really have any charisma to speak of. He won some fights, but by 2014, it looked like his career was headed down the toilet. But then, after coming back from a drug suspension, he faced off against Alistair Overeem and shocked everyone by knocking him out. That saved his spot on the roster for sure. Then, in 2015, he submitted Matt Mitrione and decided to switch things up a bit. He gave one of the cringiest interviews in UFC history, and trust me, there have been some bad ones. He ditched his usual rock music and came out with a classical piece from the Dracula soundtrack. That should have been our first warning that something was up. Then he went all vampire on the mic, claiming that only politics could hold him down, and cackling like a horror movie villain.
I know right now there is not a man in this planet that can stop me inside this octagon, and only politics can slow me.
Fans were left scratching their heads, wondering what the heck was going on. Even worse, he tried to play it off like it was no big deal. Let's just say it didn't go over well. People cringed, fighters were confused, and Rothwell was left looking like a bit of a weirdo. But hey, at least he got some attention, right? And if you think the American is an attention seeker, wait till you hear about Mark Munoz's cry to be noticed. So Munoz, the legendary MMA fighter, retired back in 2015 after almost 9 years of dominating the sport. He made an emotional speech after his first win in a while. which happened at UFC Fight Night Edgar vs. Faber against Luke Barnett. Munoz was grateful to the UFC for giving him a solid 7 years of fights. He gave his thanks to his opponents for challenging him, to his coaches for helping him become a better fighter, and of course to the fans for cheering him on. The Philippines crowd was really feeling it, and Munoz's words hit them right in the feels. He even took off his gloves and left them on the canvas as a symbol of the end of his career.
Thank you, UFC. Thank you, Dana White. Thank you, Lorenzo. I will cherish these memories for a lifetime.
It was a bittersweet moment, but everyone knew that Munoz had given it his all. As for the reaction of the fans and fighters, let me tell you, they were moved. Some fans even shed a tear or two because Munoz had been such a big part of the MMA scene for so long. Fighters gave him props for being a worthy opponent and a true warrior. It was a moment no one expected. And if you think that's moving, wait till you hear about what happened with Brandon Moreno and Deiveson Figueiredo. If you guys have been following the Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno fight saga, you should know it's one of the greatest trilogies in UFC history. These two have created a lot of excitement in the flyweight division, which hasn't seen much action in recent times. Their first fight ended in a draw, but Moreno won the title in the rematch, and then Figueiredo took back the title in the third bout. Last month, Moreno won the interim flyweight championship via TKO. But the post-fight interview wasn't what the promoters were hoping for. Instead of throwing insults at each other, Moreno was respectful and they even hugged it out. The promoters were probably hoping for some drama and animosity to build interest, so it was a bit of a missed opportunity there. Fans were divided about the call-out, with some praising Moreno for his sportsmanship and humility, while others wanted to see more trash talk and hype for their upcoming fourth fight. Fighters also had different reactions, with some admiring Moreno's graciousness, and others calling him out for not playing the game and building the hype. If you think that's an upset, check out what Paul Buentello did to differentiate himself from the rest. You know how WWE fans always chant along to their favorite wrestlers' catchphrases? Well, apparently, UFC fighters haven't quite caught on to that trend yet. And one fighter in particular, Paul Buentello, tried to establish his own catchphrase back in 2006. But it blew up in his face big time. So here's what happened. After winning his first 2 fights in the octagon, Buentello had been using the line, "Don't fear me, fear the consequences," as his catchphrase. But it seems like it wasn't catching on with the fans as much as he thought it would. Then, when he knocked out Gilbert Aldana and tried to have the crowd finish the line for him, he was met with a deafening silence. Ouch! It was pretty cringeworthy to say the least. Even Joe Rogan, who was conducting the post-fight interview, looked embarrassed. That's all for the most infamous post-fight interviews.